the Son, and to the Holy Spirit.
This is Orthodoxy Live with Father Evan Armatas, a live interactive call-in program where your questions about the Orthodox faith are addressed. Father Evan is the priest at St. Spiridon Greek Orthodox Church in Loveland, Colorado. Call in your question at 1-855-AF-RADIO. That's 1-855-237-2346. Here now is Father Evan.
Well, hello, and welcome to this edition of Orthodoxy Live, your live call-in show about the Orthodox faith, her teachings, and her traditions. I'm your host, Father Evan, and we are streaming to you live here on Ancient Faith Radio. I'm glad you're with us. It's August 13th, 2023. We're right in the midst, or towards the end, of the fast that comes at the beginning of August, known as the Dormition fast. It concludes on the evening of the 14th, as we make our way into the commemoration of the falling asleep of the Virgin Mary, the Theotokos, as she is called in the church, Jesus' mother. And this fast, which is 2 weeks long, is often called the Small Lent. There are 4 fast periods of the liturgical calendar: Great Lent, the Fast of the Apostles. It usually hits sometime in June. It comes after the Feast of Pentecost and before the Feast of St. Peter and Paul, which is on the 29th, and the Feast of the Holy Apostles on June 30th. And then there's this feast, or fast, I should say, and then the last of them, which comes in November through December, the Fast of Advent. Each of these fasts ends with a feast, a celebration, and the fast helps us to prepare. If you've got questions about fasting, what it means as a Christian, and how to implement it, refer you back to my first book called Toolkit for Spiritual Growth, and talk about the scriptural and biblical references for fasting, practically what does it mean to fast, how is it done, and some of the theology in a pretty simple, short chapter. But anyway, welcome to the program. We look forward, of course, to taking your calls this evening. You can reach us by dialing in at 1-855-237-2346. That's 1-855-AF-RADIO. A quick note to all of you, and to my producer and engineer, Matushka Trudy, on the other end. Unfortunately, my X screen, which is the board that shows up on my laptop that shows me the studio calls, won't come up, because I think basically when we were trying to hook up the video, that got knocked out. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a quick break, and we'll come right back on the other side. I'm going to grab my cell phone so Matushka Trudy can contact me through cell phone. But again, you're listening to Orthodoxy Live. The number to call, 1-855-237-2346. We're going to take a short break. We'll be right.
Orthodoxy Live with Father Evan will be back in a moment. In the meantime, lines are open at 1-855-AF-RADIO. That's 1-855-237-2346.
This is Father Stephen Freeman. I'm happy to announce Ancient Faith's publication of my latest book, Face to Face, Knowing God Beyond Our Shame. Some modern therapists have described shame as the master emotion, one that colors and shapes our world in ways that we hardly imagine. The Christian tradition is no stranger to this, and has a rich understanding of the ways this part of our inner life shapes our experience of the world. This book offers something of a roadmap to that inner life. What is shame? Is it always bad? Does it have any useful purpose for us? Join me in an exploration of knowing God beyond our shame, finding the true God whom the Scriptures tell us did not turn his face from the spitting and the shame. Face to Face is now available at store.ancientfaith.com. That's store.ancientfaith.com.
Father Evan is ready for your call, and our lines are open at 1-855-AF-RADIO. That's 1-855-237-2346. Here once again is Father Evan.
Well, welcome back. Thank you for letting me take that quick break right at the start of our program. As I was saying, a little technical difficulty. There's a software that loads into the laptop here in the studio here at the house, and unfortunately it won't load because I think we have reconfigured things, and nonetheless I had to run upstairs and grab my cell phone so that our engineer and producer Matushka can contact me with a caller. So actually we're going to go out to our first caller. Welcome to the program. Is this Matthew?
Hi, yes, Father Evan, can you hear me? This is Matthew.
Yeah, I sure can, Matthew. Where are you calling from?
I'm in Florida right now, and it is very hot here.
Oh, where in Florida are you?
I'm in the Orlando area.
Okay. So I have a good friend. He happens to be the parish council president of our parish, and he's at a conference in Orlando, and I spoke with him. I think it was Friday evening. Him and his wife are down there, and I said, have you even left the hotel? And he said, no, it's just way too hot to even think about going outside. Is that the case?
Yeah, my weather app says excessive heat warning. It said that for a while.
Oh, my. Well, in some ways, it's interesting, living in Colorado. The flip is, January, February here's cold. It's not extreme bitter cold. Like some people think Colorado's like this ice box. It's not at all like, let's say East Coast cold or Canada cold. Yet we get these snaps, where it'll be like maybe 5 days below zero temps. And I guess in exchange for that, you have what, June, July, August, that's pretty hard?
Yeah, it's June, July, August here in Florida are just unbearable. I mean, I'm originally from New York, though, and it was like upstate New York, so basically Canada climate. Man, the winters there were like 6 months and brutal.
Yeah, I would say the coldest I've ever been in my life was actually in Albany, New York.
Oh, really? Yeah, Rochester is where I'm from. Lake Ontario's right there, so.
Yeah, I mean, I was there in the winter a couple of times, and I was like, this is a new level of cold, and I think a little bit of the lake effect, right? And, lots of snow. The sun doesn't come out. Once it snows, it's on the ground. I mean, all of that gives me PTSD because I look at a picture of winter and like even right now, and I'm like, oh, it's going to snow again.
Yep.
But I don't know how well I would handle 3 months of having to stay inside, though. That would be tough.
Yeah.
Well,
it's pretty bad.
Well, welcome to the program. I think you had emailed me, and I suggested you call in. Okay, so Matthew, you'll have to refresh my memory. I get way too many emails, but I know from time to time emails come in, and yours. I remember Matthew, and I think I have your last name too. But yeah, why don't you share with me and with our listeners what's on your mind?
Okay, so this is so I'm a Protestant, and looking at Orthodoxy from the outside, obviously the number one thing you notice is the icons, right? I come from a tradition that's pretty like no icons, Reformed tradition. So basically, I've been trying to do I've been doing a lot of research on Orthodoxy, and a lot of it just makes so much sense, and it seems very historically connected. But I was trying to do some research on the history, like of the early church, what the early church fathers said about art and images and all that, and how the Jewish people viewed art and icons in the time of Christ and before and after. And it seems to me that icons are a development, and even like a development that took several hundred years before Christians first started using icons. And so my question is, because of that, how do like the Orthodox justify using icons, and not just using icons, but particularly like icon veneration, and saying that this is not idolatry, this is an ancient practice? Because it seems to me, based on the historical data and, of course, the kind of the plain reading, if you will, of the Second Commandment, I'm just at a loss to see how icons are justified.
Yeah. Okay, well, lots there to just start with in terms of unpacking. The first is, let's just chat a little bit about, your appreciation for an investigation into Orthodoxy. How did that come about?
I don't know. I think originally it was just I'm from a Protestant tradition that cherishes church history, and so just kind of doing my own like church history. Mostly focused on the West, and you hear a little bit about the East, and I kind of like was like, okay, not Catholicism. The Pope's not. I don't think that's really historical. And then in my mind, I just was like, okay, well, what about Orthodoxy? Because that's the other real big tradition that claims historic roots. And I just kind of started doing my own research on it.
Got you. Yeah, I think, when typically a Christian from a Protestant background begins to investigate the early church, sometimes it comes through, as you just mentioned, sort of a historical interest, right? Sometimes it can come from a desire to understand maybe the worship life of the church, right? You're kind of, let's say, in a modern context, and the worship that you participate in, you may start to question, where does this come from, and why are we doing what we're doing, as opposed to maybe the more ancient liturgical life of the church, right? And so sometimes people will come to an investigation through the sacraments, like, the Eucharist. Sometimes it's, a deeply rooted theological problem that someone's discovered, like maybe their Christology. I remember meeting a gentleman who was doing his PhD work, and he came across the early writings of the church on Christ, and he realized that his Christology, his understanding of the theology and the person of Christ was flawed, in a deeply, what the early church would have deemed heretical way. Sometimes, the path in is different, right? There's pastoral things that come up, or, whatever it might be. But as you mentioned, for many, as they begin that investigation, there seems to be, at some point, if I had the time, I'd write a book on, the top 5, hurdles for, a Protestant Christian in investigating Orthodoxy. And one of them tends to center around the idea and the use of divine images, right? And sort of the immediate question that arises is, well, it seems like this is a breaking of the commandment of God, right from the start. And so then, whether one does kind of a cursive or more in-depth view of, let's say, early writings, you could be swayed, to kind of take one track or another, right? That is there evidence in the early church that the early church fathers, apostolic fathers, are you aware of some of these terms?
Oh, yeah.
Yep. Irenaeus and Ignatius and stuff, Clement, are they arguing against? Do they really mention them? And then, you go later to, let's say, the Cappadocians, John Chrysostom and Gregory and Basil, right? And then, down the list, you keep going, right? 6th century, 8th century, 10th, even up to St. Gregory Palamas and onward, right? And so then where do you find yourself? I would say I've read some of the critiques that have come out of Protestants who are more familiar with the patristic witness, right? And sort of stating their concerns around it seems as if maybe the preponderance of the patristic mind was against icons, right? And their use. Right. And then, you read a counter argument that's written that says, no, that's not evident there. And rather the opposite argument is made, right? And perhaps you're maybe familiar with maybe some more modern apologists. I don't know if you've come across the writings of Stephen DeYoung or Andrew Damick. Have you come across them?
I've heard of Stephen DeYoung. Haven't really read his stuff, but I've heard his name for sure.
Yeah. Both he and Damick, both of them are priests, former Protestants, who will argue rather forcefully from a sort of patristic and biblical standpoint on divine images and their appropriate use. And, so again, I think, what I'm trying to illuminate here is this idea that, people tend to line up and pick and choose and can, their texts in order to either support or attack the use of iconography.
Right.
And that can be problematic, right? Now, let me try and just give a little bit of a shaded and a nuanced understanding. As you're probably aware, the church went through a period of iconoclasm.
Yep. Yeah.
Right? Where the icons of the churches were removed and churches were burned, icons were destroyed. And the church forbid the use of iconography, right? And then, of course, you have the church in council, right, determining that such movement was not according to the fathers and not according to the scriptures and not according to the tradition of the church, right? So you have the restoration of holy icons within the life of the church. And so have you kind of studied that period?
Yeah, not super extensively. I mean, I read the Seventh Ecumenical Council, and I was just listening to, I think, Anthony McGuckin, his history of the Orthodox Church and the iconoclastic controversy. I was just reading that part. So yeah, I'm somewhat familiar with it.
Well, here's the shaded or nuanced perspective I want to provide for you. You have to understand that the people within the church who are writing for and against, right? They're drawing upon a level of understanding that, frankly, for us today is more academic. They're very familiar with the writings before them. They're very familiar with the customs, traditions that come before them. And then where the church lands is to say, no, the use of icons is according to the tradition of the church and is not a breaking of the second commandment. Now, the reason I mention that to you is that, really, Orthodoxy is taken, on the whole. You can't parse it up, right?
Yeah.
You can't, divide it up and say, well, I'm going to, accept these parts and not that part, because in a sense, it's holistic, right? So iconography folds into how we understand the incarnation, right? Mm-hmm. It folds into piety. It folds into scriptural exegesis. It blends in with liturgical worship, right? So it's sort of this fabric that you can't sort of tease out one of the threads, right?
Right.
And so that's just kind of giving you a kind of a nuanced look. Now, there are articles that you can pull up. You can do a simple Google search about, Orthodox perspective on the patristic writings of the use of icons, right? And you can kind of go down that road and you can look up some of these things that I'm kind of referencing. Or you could go to, like the work of Damick, Heterodoxy, Orthodoxy, or Father Stephen DeYoung, Religion of the Apostles, and some of his podcasts even on scriptures that kind of go through the use of images even within Israel, right? And how was imagery used. But probably the classic work is, have you come across the three treatises on the divine images by St. John Damascene?
I've heard them referenced. I haven't read them myself, no.
Not St. John of Damascus, right? I would point you to that. Another work that I think you would want to look at is On the Incarnation by St. Athanasius the Great. Those are two books that I think would be helpful. Sometimes, Matthew, let me pause really quick. Any redirect or question there as I'm just talking through this?
No, it's all very helpful. The only, I do get that, I do get that, like, people come at this from their own kind of preconceived notions, and you'll just look at the evidence and you'll say, oh, hey, it's, look, the fathers were against icons. I know it's all too easy to do that, so I'm trying to avoid that.
Yeah.
I know the biblical the obvious biblical thing is, the cherubim on the Ark of the Covenant, embroidered all over the Ark in the temple. And then the bronze serpent, I of course know that. And the other argument I heard that was pretty intriguing was, I think it's from Hebrews, where the author of Hebrews is writing how worship on earth, according to how Moses made it, was supposed to reflect heavenly worship. And now, of course, we know, because of the resurrection of Christ and the incarnation of Christ, we know that he is bodily resurrected. The saints are with him in glory right now, and so reflecting that in divine icons, that does make sense to me. But it's hard for me to get over the second commandment.
Yeah, I think sometimes too, again, what is helpful is to understand that the use of icons does not lead to the worshiping of an object. It's a completely different thing, in the sense that in the ancient world, an image was understood to be the God itself, right? And there was a whole ceremony in which, the spirit of the God was, if you will, inbreathed and trapped within the image that was created. And that, of course, is not what's going on in Christian imagery. Rather, it is a reflection of a prototype, or a reflection of a deeper reality. And we can't ignore the sort of catechetical and exegetical nature of iconography and divine images, right? If you look at the liturgy itself, it's an icon of heavenly worship, right? Just the movements, how it's ordered. That is something that's a little bit disconnected within, let's say, modern Christian understanding, right? This idea of, worship, this idea of the church being an icon, a reflection of what's going on in the kingdom. And you're alluding to that in what you said just a moment ago, right? But, if you think about, for example, I'll give you a simple one, the icon of the Nativity of Christ, right, as it's depicted. The way that the church has depicted that icon shows Christ in a cave, right? Shows an ox and a donkey within the cave. It shows the Lord Jesus in a trough with Mary, his mother, and his heavenly protector, his earthly protector, Joseph, right, as an elderly man. All of those images in that icon are protecting a correct understanding of Scripture. Once you've taken that image away and you look at the modern use of, let's say, a creche, you really destroy the exegetical nature of imagery. And then as a Protestant, you start to believe that Christ was laid inside a little wooden structure and that there were all sorts of animals inside, when Isaiah 1:3 clearly stipulates that that's not the case, right? It's the ox and the donkey that are there, that know their master, not other animals, right? And then you start to conflate, and confuse things, like, you have the wise men showing up. Well, wait a minute. The wise men didn't show up till he was 2, right?
Yeah, right.
And so, it's not as if these are, accidental images. They're not, happenstance. These are images that are very, very carefully constructed to protect a truth. And those images have done a much better job in, let's say, the church than when you remove them. And, frankly, I'll often, challenge a Protestant to say, well, you're not really an iconoclast. When you were a child, you had a Bible and it had pictures in it, didn't it?
Yeah.
Or you had the praying hand Jesus up on a wall, or, you don't have strictly, you use a cross, that's an image. And so, there are lots of images used, but they may not be theologically robust or correct. And so even the use of certain colors, right, the way something's depicted inside or outside, all of those things are protecting an eternal truth, And, you can even move into the idea of, like, well, if I'm looking at icons, at the same time, I have to turn that lens on, how is it that I view salvation? How do I view the sacraments? Do I understand, the Eucharist to be truly the body and blood of Christ? And again, as you're weaving that all together, at some point within Orthodoxy, you come to the realization, well, Orthodoxy has decided through ecumenical council and accepted by the faithful that the use of icons is the faith of the apostles, right? So you can't tease it out, you're kind of stuck with it, and now that's the negative way of looking at it. Or you say the revelatory way is to say, this is an interpretation of Scripture that is nuanced, perhaps by my simple reading of the second commandment, but perhaps is not an abomination or heresy against, the commandment of God. Lots of thoughts there, lots to chew on.
Oh, very helpful. Thank you for all that. And I'll be checking out those resources. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, Matthew, thanks for calling, and feel free to call in again. Let me know how the journey goes.
All right. Thank you, Father Evan.
Okay. Good night, Matthew.
Hi. Good night.
All right. So we're going to go back out to the phones, and we've got, first of all, I guess I got a message here from our engineer, and she says, Dean Tsar, I'm not sure how you pronounce the last name, says, hey, I want to just tell you I'm listening in on YouTube, and hello from Melbourne, Australia. Well, thank you, Dean. I know that we have listeners all over, which is a lot of fun. I was traveling in Central Europe. This was a few years back, and I got to a remote area, and I met somebody, and there was a translator, and we got to talking, and the person that was talking through the translator pulled out their phone, and they had the Ancient Faith radio app and Orthodoxy Live's image of the show, the logo, and kind of pointed at me and smiled, and I said, "Oh, thank you so much for listening." Turns out that the person was using an interpreter because they didn't feel very comfortable using English, but later on they opened up, and their English was quite excellent, as we often find out. People speak English obviously all over the world, and it's to our shame that we can't speak the language that they often know natively. They know multiple languages. But let's go back out to the phones and take a call from Joey. Joey, are you there?
Hi, Father Evan. Can you hear me?
Yeah, welcome to the program.
Father, may I ask your blessing?
Oh, the Lord bless you always. And thanks for calling. I mean, some of you may wonder what Joey just has asked me to do, but it's a common thing to ask for a blessing. And the response that a priest gives is the blessing of the Lord. And so the Lord bless you, Joey. Well, nice to have you on your program. Tell me, what's on your mind tonight?
Yeah, I actually sent you an email sometime around the end of the Apostles' Fast, actually.
Okay.
And I know you prioritize callers, so it kind of worked out. I normally listen to you the day after, but things kind of worked out, so I thought I'd try to call in. And
oh, great.
I got through, and I'm rambling. I know I'm rambling. So
no, you're not rambling at all. You sound totally fine. It's so funny because obviously on your side, it's your first time, and you can feel nervous or if you're sounding foolish, but I can tell you on my side, I've almost never, I cannot recall one caller who called in which they sounded nervous, but I know how it feels on the other side. It's sort of like my wife used to say, "Oh, our kids were so awful in church today." And I was like, "No, they weren't." But, she noticed every little thing they did. No one else noticed anything. So trust me, Joey, you're not rambling. You sound great. The audio quality is good. And you don't sound like you're anxious or nervous or fearful or anything. So just feel at home, just a conversation between two of us.
Well, thank God. I was received this past Holy Saturday into the church. I was
Congratulations.
For about Thank you. I was catechumen for about 18 months, attended about 3 or 4 months before that. I actually found Orthodoxy when I was in college, briefly, in New Orleans.
No way.
At Holy Trinity Greek Orthodox Church, his first Orthodox church I ever attended.
Oh, wow. Do you remember who the priest was at the time?
Yeah, he's now Metropolitan Gregory.
No way.
Yeah.
Huh. Oh, that's really cool. Where'd you go to college?
Loyola University, New Orleans.
Oh, okay. There's lots of Loyolas, aren't there?
There are. There's the one here in LA where I live now, where I live now. There's one in Chicago, and then there's the one in New Orleans.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So you first experienced Orthodoxy then, and then 8 months ago you said you started up going to a church and received on Holy Saturday. So that was just this April.
Yeah, and so I mean, it's been great. I love the Orthodox Church. I love the liturgy, probably more than anything. I'm learning to chant. I'm up at the chanter stand now every Sunday. But there's something that's kind of been in the back of my mind, and I probably should have worked this out before I was baptized. But I struggle with knowing if there's actually a place for me in the church because I'm actually gay. And I love the church. I know what the church's expectations are. You know, in catechism, we were taught that there's two kind of paths for Orthodox adults, and it's marriage or monasticism. Obviously, the marriage path is closed, so I don't know if that means my hands are tied and I should be looking for a monastery to go to. And I don't know that I can really have this conversation with my priest, to be perfectly honest with you.
Okay. Well, so we're going to have
ironically enough, I found Orthodoxy because I was dating a guy who was Orthodox. So I need your help, Father, because I don't know what else to go to.
Yeah, I mean, so as you're describing this, let me just kind of help maybe some of our listeners understand too contextually the theology of the church. Okay, so as you've described it, Joey, the church blesses the union of a man and a female, right? And it does not bless the union, and here we're talking sexual union of same-sex partners, male, male, female, female, right? And that position of the church hasn't changed. I think a lot of Christians today, depending on where they may attend or find themselves, have seen the churches they attend to. And here I'm not critiquing or supporting. I'm just describing. Their church may accept same-sex unions, right, or may reject them. Then there's, kind of go down that list of, do they accept transgenderism? And, there's these other contemporary moral questions that are raised, and different groupings of Christians are on different places on that spectrum, right? So, but Orthodoxy has not changed its teaching, nor its practice, right? So as you said, it's not that I could be married in the church. The church does not do that. And so then what do I do, right? How do I navigate my faith? And you brought up, well, it was basically explained to me, for an adult, there's marriage or monasticism, and that's it, right? I guess where we'll start, Joey, and thank you for the courage, the honesty, and the vulnerability to reach out, call, and talk about this. I appreciate it. I really do. And I think the dialogue's important, right? And we need to be in a position where we can talk about and understand, right, where the church is, and then how am I going to, because this boils down to your life, right? And how are you going to live your life in the church? I think the dichotomy that was given to you, and again, I'm not trying to critique a teaching that was given, but I think it's too much of a sort of flattened view of how the church looks at adult life. I mean, we don't think that the only avenues are marriage and celibacy, monastic celibacy. No, we talk about living one's life in the world and living it for Christ and not having to enter into a monastery. So there's this third option, may feel like or look like 1 and 2. I'm sorry, not 1 and 2, but number 2, monasticism. But we see historically and in many communities today, many Orthodox Christians live a life not in which they're celibate like moving to a monastery, but they live for God, right? And they live in the world. They're teachers, they're doctors, they're members of, associations of the church, and they serve, honorably, nobly, in a way that glorifies God and builds up the church, and they don't enter a monastery. So I don't know, is that something that was even brought up or even considered as an option?
No, it was pretty much the dichotomy. You get married or you find a monastery.
No, I don't. Yeah, that's not traditional Orthodoxy. I mean, that just doesn't play out. I mean, I'll give you an example. I was questioned recently about some of the scholars of the church that I've known, went to school with, and have not married. And someone asked me, is it, did they decide not to marry? Was it because of their sexual preference that they did not marry? And I said, either way, whether it was a decision based on what they dedicated themselves to in the Lord, or it was because they were same-sex attracted and they knew that path was not open to them in the church, that was not the point. The point was that for them, they decided to dedicate themselves to service within the church. Now, in my own community, there are members of my community that are in the same boat, right? And they've decided that they're going to retain their life in the world, like, they're business people or whatever it might be. They're going to retain their commitment to remaining outside of a same-sex partnership. And yet they have many, I would say, have very robust lives, in terms of service within the church, service within their community, deep friendships and community. They've developed, whether they've adopted or they've developed friendships and godchildren and you name it. And it's not I would say, impoverished life. It's rather a life that you see often lived out in the church. Now, let me point this out to you as well. In some married couples in the church, the same occurs. Have you heard of this?
I've heard stories of like married couples, they have kids, the kids are grown and husband and wife both go to monasteries.
Yeah, they don't always just go to monasteries. No, sometimes they decide that friendship and that relationship is no longer going to be sexual, but they don't go off to monasteries, but they dedicate themselves to the service of the church and to those in their community without entering a monastery. And so I just think that was a pretty flat view of the traditional historical nature of how the church has moved through time and space and how people have done it. I think there's a third option for you. Yeah,
and I kind of had a feeling that maybe wasn't exactly what the patristic consensus was on the issue, but I wasn't sure.
Well, and the thing of it is, I'm going to say something that's important pastorally. The church. I'll give you another way of looking at this through a different lens. So, I grew up with a large amount of my family coming from Greece. They immigrated. And as I was growing up as a child, I still had aunts and uncles, grandparents who, their first language was Greek. Their country of origin was Greece. They grew up in often rural. I'm trying to think if anyone in my family grew up in the city. No, all my relatives came from small villages, right? Now,
Right.
They were, almost all of them were married. I had a couple of relatives who, I don't know why, both male and female, who didn't marry. And they, remained single their whole life. They lived, with in close communion with the family and with the church. And their reasons for not marrying were never explained to me, right? But where I wanted to go is actually the married couples. So I saw examples of marriage that, if you really place them against the template of what has been sort of romanticized in America and sort of the Hollywood ideal of a marriage, it wouldn't have matched up. So I'll give you an example. I had relatives who lived in the village and they worked on boats because one of the villages that, my family came from was in Greece. And they weren't home much. you know, they were home, you know, a few days, maybe a month, or they lived, you know, some of them were sheep herders, and so they were out with the sheep, and they would come back. And in America, it's really kind of the understanding that, you know, every marriage is going to be, you know, husband and wife in the house, you know, co-raising the family. And yet, let's say one of those family members is a bit of a recluse, you know, today, maybe even autistic, and social settings are not really comfortable for them. In the old world, there was, you know, room for that. In the new world, you know, we sort of we're trying to fit everybody into the same mold. And so what I'm trying to express is that your walk in the church does not have to look exactly like these one or two things. You following me?
Okay.
You know, now I'm not saying that the church does not, you know, it does not support a sexual relationship between the same sex. You know, that's you're aware of, you know, and I'm not saying something different. But what I am saying is, I think it's unfortunate that, you know, some may come to view their Christian life as really kind of one or two or three options. You know, the reality of the saints is such that we see people of all walks of life. You know, we see people who lived in the world. We see people who were hermits. We see people who were teachers. We see it all. Physicians, business owners. I think that's important. And I think the fact that, you know, your life is not going to be the same as the person next to you is a good thing. You know, that makes the church more robust and stronger, you know, when it's more diverse. You know, now navigating that, and navigating how you're going to be within the church and participate in the life of the church is going to be a pastoral, what do I want to say here? It's important for you to have good pastoral leadership. And so you mentioned earlier, I'm not sure I can talk to my priest about this. I understand that. But I think you're going to have someone that you can bring into this and come alongside you to talk through how you're going to do this. Because otherwise it's, you know, you're going to be on your own.
Mm-hmm.
You know, is this helping, Joey?
Yeah, absolutely. If I can kind of, as I'm understanding it, basically your answer is stay on the boat, hold on, trust in the Lord, and things will probably work out the way they need to work out.
Yeah, and I think build a life, you know, build a vibrant, robust life, you know, that's full of, you know, when we think about ultimately salvation is through relationship, okay? And you have to build a intricate, vibrant life full of relationship, you know, where you're connected and you're not living, you know, alone. As you said, I don't know that I could be a monastic, but even monastics live in community, right? Except for those that are living in the idiorhythmic or hermetic style, you know, and community is how we're saved. So, you know, otherwise it would be like a desert. You know, how are you going to do that? You know?
Right.
So I think building a vibrant, robust life, yes, of course, trusting in God. I think also what I'm saying is you need to find a priest, a spiritual father, someone who you can take in, you know, the confidence, take into confidence the things that you are discussing with me, and you can work with them and through them, right, to navigate a path for your life in the church.
Definitely. Thank you so much for your help, Father Evan. I really appreciate it.
Joey, you're so welcome. Feel free to ring in again if you need to, okay?
Definitely. Blessed peace, Father.
Okay, bye-bye. You as well. It's such a incredible conversation to have with Joey, and, you know, a difficult one. I just am so amazed by his honesty and vulnerability, his desire to find a way to live within the life of the church, you know. So it looks like my producer is texting me your question, which comes in from Deborah. I don't know that Deborah's on the line, but she's written in and asked, what is the difference between Orthodox Christianity and, Deborah, are you there?
Yes, blessings, Father.
The Lord bless you. Hi, Deborah. Where are you calling from?
Bloomington, Kentucky.
Oh, how nice. I don't think I've ever even heard of Bloomington, Kentucky. If we were Bloomington, Indiana.
Burlington.
Burlington. Forgive me, I didn't hear that correctly. Well, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Yeah.
My question tonight, Father, is what is the difference between Celtic Orthodoxy and Eastern Orthodoxy? I'm Eastern, but it seems like I looked on the Celtic website, and it seems like they're vastly different than Eastern Orthodoxy. It seems like they're more Western Catholic than anything, more, especially their views on salvation. It was pretty vague, though.
Yeah. What I understand Celtic Orthodox to be is a communion of, quote unquote, the French Orthodox and the Orthodox Church of the Gauls and a union with the Western Orthodox churches. It's an autocephalous church. I think of the 20th century. It is not, as I understand it, but I could be a little bit wrong here. I don't know that it's in full communion with Orthodox Church. I could be wrong. But then again, this is a very, you're testing me here. Celtic Orthodoxy, people who are listening are going, what is she talking about? But I think, now it could be a form of Orthodoxy that has utilized the Western Rite, but I don't think that it is in full communion with Holy Orthodoxy, right?
On their website, they base it. Well, they did call, the Eastern view of salvation and healing, a heresy. It's not the same view.
Yeah,
and it looks like that maybe even their views on the Eucharist is different as well.
Yeah. I think we're talking about a very small group of people, like, probably under 1,000, right? That would call themselves. Now, there is a distinction we could make here that may be helpful in our kind of understanding of this. There is something that we could say is Orthodoxy within Celtic Christianity, or Orthodoxy and Celtic saints who are Orthodox. I'll give you an example. So are you aware of Father Seraphim and the monastery on the island of Mull and the Hebrides?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, Father Seraphim is firmly Orthodox, right? Canonical Orthodox. And he is reestablishing the witness of Orthodoxy within the island of Iona and the island of Mull, right? And there are Orthodox Celtic saints, right? Bridget of Kildare, right? It would be someone that maybe St. Patrick, right? And there's a sense of Orthodoxy within Celtic lands that is fully canonical, right? But I think what you're talking about, the Celtic Orthodox Church, is a non-canonical, would we say it this way, schismatic group, very small. And I don't even think that they currently have, even within their own understanding, a hierarchy or primacy, a primate.
Right.
How did you run into them?
Well, honestly, the Orthodox church that I attend is over an hour and something away from me.
Oh, so you were looking.
Yes. but I didn't run into him that way. My priest has been in talks, with a gentleman as maybe going into a mission type deal. I haven't been able to speak with the priest that's here yet. I'm going to reach out to him. Perhaps, if I think the bishop has to approve them. They are non-canonical, and I don't know if they're wanting to become Eastern Orthodox. I just don't know. But when I looked on the website, it was I was like, what?
Fuzzy.
This is not, this is not, I just don't know how we would be in communion.
Yeah, and I don't think that,
the differences.
Yeah, I don't think that we are. I mean, one of the simple ways that people really kind of figure this out, when I came up here into northern Colorado, I met a bunch of people who said, oh, we're Orthodox. We go to Holy Trinity Orthodox Church. And so I just said, whoa, okay, who's your bishop? And that things got really kind of muddy and fuzzy there. And then I said, well, gosh, I hate to tell you, but you're not Orthodox as I understand that, right? You're not canonically so, because they were attending, St. Spiridon's. And I said, if you would like to participate, as a guest, of course you're welcome in the ministries, but sacramentally you cannot participate in the life of the church because we're not in communion. And
right.
And usually whenever there's sort of like a hazy question mark, hanging over something, then your radar should go up and say, this doesn't sound right. Now, it's pretty simple to sort of say, okay, who's your bishop? And then, is that bishop then under a particular primate, and synod? And then we know, okay, this is truly an Orthodox church. Now, again, with the Celtic Orthodox Church, that is, I think, something that really just kind of appeared in France. They may have a few churches in England, a couple in America. And I said, I think there's under 1,000 people. And I have to say to you, Deborah, you get the award in 11 years for asking perhaps one of the most nuanced and unusual questions I've received on Orthodoxy Live. And I'm kind of patting myself on the back that I didn't totally just kind of go, I don't know what to say. I don't know how I pulled that off, but God bless you, Deborah. Thanks for the question.
Well, I know. Forgive me, Father, but I know that the church is connected to Saint Francis of Assisi.
Oh,
that's
not
Catholic?
That's Roman Catholic. St. Francis of Assisi. I've actually been to his shrine. But again, remember that even that connection, I'm pretty sure the Roman Catholic Church would say, no, they're not part of what they would deem as the Holy Roman Church. They wouldn't accept them either. There are a lot of these little groups out there like this. And, in some ways, the best way to understand them is sort of like how Orthodoxy would view a lot of the Protestant groups that exist. They're kind of singular or loose federations of a group of churches that are not, quote unquote, capital T, the capital C church, right? But oftentimes, they are well-intentioned people. It doesn't make them, ill-intended. Or ill-intentioned. It just means that they are not correct in their Christian understanding. Now, that isn't a holier than thou position. It's very important that Orthodoxy doesn't take that. We may have received the right teaching, the right belief, the right worship, but if we don't have the right action, orthopraxia as it's called, our right belief, is not enough to save us. Just believe in the right things. The Lord says, even the demons believe, or Paul says this, and tremble. We must live a Christian life as well. So, Deborah, thanks for calling. And like I said, if we pass out awards at the end of the year, you're getting the award for the most obscure question.
Thank you, Father.
Okay, bye-bye, Deborah.
Bye-bye.
So I think we've got another question here, and again, my producer may have to help me. Dean on YouTube is commenting that many people north of the Christian faith, what does that mean, Matushka? Oh, not of the Christian faith. Question why we wear crosses? Oh, okay. All right. Well, let's go down that path. So if we think about the use of the cross within the church, that is something, it kind of goes back to the very first question we started with Matthew, right? When Matthew was calling in to ask about the use of divine images, and he was wondering, is that something that was native, original to the church, or was it a development? And is there a division, if you would, between the early church writers and today about whether or not the use of icons would be correct? Similarly, you could almost say that of the cross, right? Here's this image, this symbol that Christians adopted right in the beginning and started placing that along with other imagery, like, the use of a fish with the letters ichthys within the symbol of a simple fish. Maybe you've seen that image online or in some other way. But the use of the cross was something early adopted by Christians. Now, is it simply ornamental? Is it simply symbolic? Of course, that word symbolic and it can be problematic in terms of how you define what it means to have symbolism, but we're not going to go into that right now. But no, the use of the cross is understood as true and real and powerful, even the making of the sign of the cross. And here's where the church takes us, and there's lots to say here, but we're up against the hour, so I'll just take a quick detour into an event that occurred in the Old Testament, and that is the Israelites who are in the wilderness, and they are being bitten and dying because they're being bitten by snakes, and this is an unusual event that occurs in the Old Testament, but in modern culture, if you've ever seen an ambulance, you've seen the symbol of the brazen serpent. Well, to solve the problem, Moses is instructed by God to take a serpent, a brazen serpent, a bronze serpent, and place it on a pole and lift it up and tell the people to look upon it. And those who do, if they're bitten, will not die. Death will not impact or affect them. And so, you see in the modern symbol for, let's say, health, right? The serpent's around a wooden pole, and that's where that comes from. Well, this was understood as a foreshadowing of the cross, right? That there would be this symbol of death. A serpent is a symbol of death, and it would become a symbol of life and God's preservation of life and his protection against death. And so if you go into an Orthodox church and the bishop is in serving or presiding over the service, you'll notice that he has a staff, and the staff, if you look at the top of it, has two serpents going towards the middle of the pole, and in the middle of the staff or the pole is the cross, right? And we know that for those of us who look upon the cross of Christ, who believe upon the cross of Christ, we will not be impacted or affected by death. We will be preserved by God, life will be preserved, and death will pass over us. That's the Passover, right? And so, it is understood as real, not just simply ornamental or artistic. And so Christians they began to adorn their homes, their churches, their businesses with the sign of the cross. And this has power. So if you think about the immaterial warfare that occurs around us, Paul speaks about it in Ephesians, the sign of the cross, as I was a child, my grandmother would make the sign of the cross over us. She'd make the sign of the cross in the air, especially when we felt as if there was something nefarious or challenging or scary, right? Even something evil, right? And we do this in the church all the time. We're constantly making the sign of the cross. So for those outside the church, it's hard to unpack all of this, right? And they may simply look at it as a superstition, or something of the like, or just really kind of a way of designating, that one person's a Christian and someone else is wearing maybe the Star of David and they're Jewish, or maybe the crescent or they're Islamic. No, for Christians, this wearing of the cross is more than that. It's more than jewelry, right? It is the power of God. And Paul writes about this as well. All right. Well, gosh, thanks so much for listening. We've hit the end of the hour. And, for all of you who've listened in tonight, if you didn't catch us live, and you're listening as a podcast, don't forget you too can ask a question. You can just write in to ask, or ask at ancientfaith.com, or you can write into Orthodoxy Live at ancientfaith.com, or you can record a question by going to ancientfaith.com to the live radio button and then just finding Orthodoxy Live and clicking on the microphone button and recording your question there. We'll be back next week. Between now and then, to all of you who will be celebrating Our Lady's Dormition, her falling asleep on Tuesday, the 15th of August, may her prayers be with you and all of us. And thanks for listening. God bless. For Orthodoxy Live and Ancient Faith, I'm Father Evan. Good night.